Welcome to the Economy of Nations, the podcast where history's greatest empires come alive. Join us as we uncover how nations built their wealth, shaped the world, and left legacies that still influence our lives today. Imagine the sound of 1,000 hooves pounding against the grasslands. The year is 1206. The cold winds sweep across the Mongolian steppe, and a council of tribal leaders gathers in a great Kurultai. At its center stands a man once known as Temujin, who has united warring clans under his banner. The chiefs raise him on a felt carpet, a symbol of his elevation, and proclaim him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. Few in that moment could have imagined that this warrior would create the largest land empire the world has ever seen. Yet behind the conquests, the violence, and the fear, there was also an empire that revolutionized trade, finance, and communication across continents. Today, we uncover how the Mongol Empire not only conquered, but connected the world, and in doing so, reshaped the global economy. Picture the Mongols in their early years, nomads of the steppe, living in felt tents called yurts, herding sheep, horses, and goats. Their wealth was not in cities or gold, but in animals, mobility, and resilience. Life was harsh. Winters were brutal, summers dry. To survive here demanded discipline, endurance, and above all, unity. And unity was exactly what Genghis Khan created. He built loyalty not on bloodlines, but on merit. Warriors were promoted based on ability, not noble birth. He created a code of laws, the yasa, which enforced discipline, order, and loyalty. These principles, simple yet powerful, gave the Mongols an edge against the great kingdoms they would soon face. Now, imagine being a merchant in China during the early 1200s. You hear rumors of a terrifying army sweeping across the land. Horsemen who move faster than any force before, who strike suddenly, vanish, and return with overwhelming power. Cities fall in weeks, sometimes days. The Mongols destroy, yes, but they also build. When Genghis Khan captures cities, he doesn't just plunder them. He often spares craftsmen, scholars, using their skills to strengthen his growing empire. This was not destruction for destruction's sake. It was conquest with a purpose. As the Mongol Empire expanded, stretching from China to Persia, from Russia to the Middle East, a remarkable thing happened. For the first time in centuries, a vast portion of Eurasia was united under a single authority. This created what historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace. With ruthless efficiency, they crushed resistance, but once lands were under their control, they encouraged trade, protected merchants, and ensured safe passage along routes that had once been plagued by bandits and warring states. Can you imagine traveling the Silk Road at this time? Caravans of camels carrying silk from China, spices from India, glassware from Persia, and silver from Europe. Under Mongol rule, these roads became safer than ever before. The empire established way stations, known as yam, where fresh horses and supplies awaited travelers. Messengers could ride across thousands of miles, relaying information with astonishing speed. Traders could journey from Venice to Beijing with greater security than at almost any other time in history. And here is where the Mongols surprise us. For all their reputation as fierce warriors, they were also pragmatic rulers. Genghis Khan and his successors understood that conquest alone could not sustain an empire. Wealth came from trade, from exchange, from the flow of goods and ideas, so they created policies to encourage commerce. They exempted merchants from heavy taxes, offered them protection, and even provided loans to encourage long-distance trade. In a world where merchants were often distrusted or burdened by rulers, the Mongols valued them as vital partners. Now imagine being a European merchant like Marco Polo in the 13th century. You've heard tales of Cathay, China, and of the Great Khan who rules it. Under Mongol rule, you could travel across Asia through lands once hostile and dangerous and reach the court of Kublai Khan in China. And when you returned, your stories would astonish Europe. The Mongol Empire, in its vastness, made the world feel smaller. It connected cultures that had long been apart. Europe learned of Chinese inventions like gunpowder, paper money, and the compass. Ideas flowed east and west, carried by merchants, monks, and diplomats. This was globalization before the modern age. But let's pause for a moment. How did an empire of nomads, people who had no great cities of their own, manage to control and enrich themselves from such a vast territory? The answer lies in adaptation. The Mongols did not impose a single system on everyone. Instead, they borrowed and adapted. In China, they adopted bureaucratic practices. In Persia, they employed administrators who understood the complexities of irrigation and agriculture. In the Islamic world, they supported scholars and even embraced aspects of Persian and Arab culture. They were conquerors, yes, but also assimilators, pulling the best from each land they ruled. Consider money. In their conquests, the Mongols encountered many forms of currency: silver coins, gold dinars, copper cash. Instead of relying only on metal, they embraced paper money, particularly under Kublai Khan in Yuan, China. Imagine that for a moment, a nomadic empire encouraging one of the most advanced financial instruments of the time. It wasn't always smooth. In some regions, people resisted paper currency, but the attempt itself shows how the Mongols thought beyond plunder. They sought systems that could sustain trade across thousands of miles. Religion, too, was handled with pragmatism. Unlike many empires that enforced a single faith, the Mongols allowed religious freedom. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and others lived under their rule, often with state support. Why? Because tolerance encouraged stability. A stable empire was good for trade, and trade was good for wealth. Imagine the diversity of a caravanserai along the Silk Road. A Christian merchant from Armenia, a Muslim trader from Samarkand, a Buddhist monk from China, all meeting under the watchful protection of Mongol soldiers. This was the empire's true strength: connection. But of course, there is another side. The Mongols ruled with iron and blood. Their methods of conquest were brutal. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Populations were massacred. Fear was as much a weapon as the bow. It was this terror that often led cities to surrender without a fight. And yet, once the fighting stopped, the same Mongols who spread terror also built stability. It is this contradiction, destruction and creation, fear and prosperity, that defines their economic legacy. By the height of their power, the Mongols controlled lands stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the edges of Europe. Never before had so much of the world been under a single system of rule. And while they are often remembered for conquest, we must remember their impact on trade. The Silk Road, under Mongol protection, became a golden highway of goods, cultures, and ideas. Europe's appetite for Asian luxuries grew, planting seeds that would drive the age of exploration. In a sense, Columbus set sail centuries later because Mongol networks had first opened Europe's eyes to the wealth of the East. Now picture the decline. Empires rise and empires fall. The Mongols were no different. After the death of Genghis Khan's successors, the empire fragmented into separate khanates: the Yuan in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. At first, these khanates still shared connections, but over time, unity fractured. Rivalries grew. Local rulers asserted independence. And as the empire divided, its power waned. By the 14th century, the Great Mongol Network began to unravel. Trade routes grew less secure. Bandits returned. The Black Death spread along the very trade routes the Mongols had protected, devastating populations across Eurasia. In China, resentment of Mongol rule fueled rebellion, leading to the rise of the Ming dynasty. The empire that had seemed unstoppable dissolved within just a few generations. But what of its legacy? Today, we often think of the Mongols as destroyers, horsemen who burned cities and left devastation. And that is true. But they were also connectors, facilitators of exchange, early pioneers of globalization. They proved that even nomads could shape the global economy, not just through conquest, but through commerce. So how should we remember them? As brutal conquerors or as the architects of a connected world? Perhaps both. For history rarely offers simple answers. What we can say is this: the Mongol Empire, for a brief shining century, created a world where ideas, goods, and people moved across continents with unprecedented freedom. They showed that power is not only about armies, but about the roads, the markets, and the flows of wealth that sustain them. And here's the question I leave with you. In our own age of global trade, digital networks, and vast empires of commerce, are we living in a world not so different from the one the Mongols helped shape? And if so, what might their rise and fall teach us about the future of today's great powers? Thank you for listening to The Economy of Nations. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow and subscribe for more journeys through history's greatest empires and discover how their legacies still shape our world today.